It's time to talk Gonzaga basketball.
Get ready.
Insiders Jim Meehan and Richard Fox bring you the latest games and standings for the Gonzaga Bulldogs on Gonzaga Basketball Insiders.
Hello and welcome back to the Zags Insiders Basketball Podcast. Jim Meehan, Richard Fox right with you as well. And Gonzaga on to the Sweet 16, 8 straight years. Almost mind-boggling, Foxy. That I think they're one behind North Carolina's record, which was 9. There might be somebody tied with North Carolina. I can't recall, but I know North Carolina did it once. It's a little bit of a tricky one because you've got the tournament. I think went to 16 teams or 32 teams in 75, and then about a decade later to the 64 team field. So it hasn't been all the way back to the start of the tournament in the 40s, but Zags are back in there again. They've made it a habit to get back there. What do you make of that streak? They got so many streaks going between 30 wins and first round wins in the tournament and Sweet 16s, all these things, and tournament appearances. But that's tough to do. That's 8 straight. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, it's of all you think about all the records, and it would be you could write a book more than likely about just what this program's accomplished over the last 20 plus years. But I would argue you put that at the top of whatever, however you begin talking about the program's relevance and success. I think that's going to be at the top of the list. I mean, it's not just the fact it's 8 years in a row, but think about the change in cast over those 8 years. It's not just been, a couple dominant classes that, were here for 4 years. And I mean, Mark has had to do an incredible job of managing turnover. It's been just remarkable, when you think about what they've done from the recruiting perspective. Collins and Holmgren, Suggs, some just really high level guys. And then their ability to hit it out of the park on the transfer portal, I think, is a big reason why they've been able to continue this run. And no, it's remarkable, Jim. It's to to keep doing what they've done has been beyond impressive. And the last thing I would say is it's not as if every one of those years those teams were dominant teams. They've had
1 year.
Yeah, they have gotten to the point now in this program where it's pretty consistently they're playing their best basketball at the right time of the year. I'm not sure that's something we would have said about a Gonzaga team or the program the first 10 years of this run. It felt often like the teams in those eras were peaking early February, mid-February. That is no longer the case now.
Yeah. I think the thing that sticks out to me is, 8 in a row. The other one that's really impressive is 25 years in a row. I know they canceled the tournament the 1 year, but they were going to be the 1 seed. Mm-hmm. So that's 25 in a row. That's almost incomprehensible too. But with the eight in a row to the Sweet 16, if you're a 1 seed, and they've been a 1 seed 5 times or whatever it is here in this stretch, you might get a little bit of a breather in the first round, but that second round game is nails. Usually it's a real tough 8-9 out of a major conference that is fully capable of beating anyone in the field, but they're an 8 or 9 for a reason. They've had some lumps, and so to do that, and as we saw, the 8-9s came through pretty good on the round of 32 in this tournament. To pull that off is really an incredible feat for the Zags. Boxy, I'm operating on just a few winks of sleep here. I got back to the house about 15 minutes ago, and I've only had 2 cups of coffee, so this could go off the rails quickly. But I heard a mattress ad on the ride back to my house, and the pitch was, "We have to get rid of junk sleep, America." And I think the guy was talking directly to me. I felt we were connecting, and so that's my goal. I got to get rid of the junk sleep because I only got a day here, and then I got to go to Vegas for the next round, and I need to get the batteries recharged.
So. Well, luckily Vegas is where you go to rest.
Yeah, no problems there.
Exactly.
It's really calm, quiet all the time. So anyway, onward. The Zags had a lot smoother few days than I did. Let's put it that way. And they opened up with Grand Canyon, a team that kind of had a little bit of a similar profile to the Zags in that they kind of really caught fire here late in the season. End of the regular season, won 6 straight, won 4 in their tournament. Offense just turned into a different team. They were shooting 50% every game after barely doing that in the first 25 or so. Defense was pretty good. All their stars started to step up, and that game and the game that followed against TCU kind of followed a similar pattern. That Grand Canyon got out early, looked good, scoring it pretty good. Zags not quite as smooth as we've seen them the last month or two, and then when it turned in a big way. And those big three, I called them the big three. I think that's pretty fair. Those 3 guys, Anton Watts, Drew Timme, Julian Strother, you can mix up the order any way you want on given night in these last 2 months, which has made them even tougher that they're spreading it around. When those guys got going, it was kind of ball game and who's next.
Yeah, I mean, Grand Canyon just doesn't have the depth of the size. I think we said it last week. They profile as a really good WCC team. I don't think at the level of Santa Clara, certainly not St. Mary's, but if you put them in the WCC, I think they're right there competing for that 4th spot. I was really impressed. We've talked about the defense, and this is not a good defensive team on balance, but they can put together those stretches, and we saw that in the second half. That 16-0 run. I think Grand Canyon was about 0 for 11, 0 for 12 during that stretch. Gonzaga plus 14 on the glass. It's something we will talk about against the game against TCU. If you're not going to be a great defensive team, but you're going to put together some stretches, that works so long as you take care of the glass for 40 minutes. And they've done a really good job over the past couple of games of doing that. And we saw that against Grand Canyon. They made their free throws. It's not something we saw against TCU, but 15 and 19. And so many of these games come down to the free throw line. And just the efficiency offensively, Gonzaga for the game, 54%, shot a great clip, 47% from 3, but didn't take a ton of them, just 15, 7 of 15. I thought they did a nice job of really establishing their ability to attack the basket, either with the post touch or off a dribble penetration. And Harrison and McLaughlin for Grand Canyon, I mean, they got their numbers, but Harrison really had to work for those. And they just weren't as efficient as they certainly needed to be over the course of the entire game to I think keep it close. But Strother goes off, has one of those games that we see him have 28 points, a double with 10 rebounds, and then Watson, Drew. We'll talk a lot about Drew here in a minute, but Watson on balance for both games. I mean, he's averaging 12 and 12, and just almost 6 offensive rebounds in both games. Just his impact on winning. Made some threes against Grand Canyon, but 7 assists, 5 steals, and a couple of blocks over the weekend. Yeah. He was really impactful in that game, and Drew just kind of did what Drew does, which is put a lot of foul pressure on you, score the ball, and I can remember in those first round games, regardless of where you're seated, but certainly if you're the higher seed, there's always some nerves. And I thought that was pretty evident for Gonzaga in that first half.
Yeah, no, they all admitted to that. And I think the big deal with Julian there is, and he talked a little about it after the game, he had a rough tournament last year. He kind of had a rough finish to the regular season. There was a point where he was shooting somewhere in the 40s on threes. And then by the end of the year, he was, 36.5 or something. So he had a tough stretch. And like, I think all great competitive athletes, that was filed in the back of his head. And for him, and then the other thing is he did it when they needed it in that game. There wasn't, he became the option. It wasn't, we've got 4 guys going and he's going. It was, they really needed him to go, and he took off. Didn't play as well in the next game, but in a way was very impactful. He got on the glass. I think he had 9 boards. He made a big 3. he played well defensively, and I think that's what's overlooked because he's hitting all the threes and floaters. His defense has gotten better, more physical, and all those things. So I know we're going to hit on the TCU game here in a second, but I even not putting up his normal offensive numbers, I think what he did in that game will help him continue through this tournament. And I look for another one out of him. I can just see him doing it, for another 25 in a game.
Well, I mean, that would certainly be helpful for the cause. I mean, I think that's a nice way to kind of lead into the TCU game, Jim. It's just, and there's a lot to talk about in that game. That was it was a big time win against a really good team, and I think for Julian, look, if you take away the Grand Canyon game, I mean, his tournament career is difficult. I mean, he's averaging less than 8 a game and shooting 29% from the field and 3 of 21 from the 3-point line. And he's obviously a lot better than those numbers are. But, it felt like to me, there were stretches in that TCU game where it felt like you're watching a guy who's playing hero basketball, where I've got to make an impact. So I'm gonna force the issue because I want to help us win the game. But what happens in that situation is you take a bad shot. There was 6 or 7 seconds left late in the clock, and he took a 30-some-odd footer rather than putting his head down and trying to get to the rim. That's just one example. Driving into 3 or 4 guys, you're not going to get easy calls in the tournament, and so he's forcing just difficult shots. And I think the hard part for players sometimes, not everybody's Drew Timme. Drew can force the issue because he's good enough and he can score. He's such a gifted scorer that even if you bring 2 or 3 guys, he's got an ability to have an impact. But there's a reason he is an all-time guy, not just at Gonzaga, but in the history of college basketball. If you know the game and you are a fan of the game, and both of us, I think, would attest that we are that way. But I mean, my first memories of college basketball are late 80s, early 90s. I mean, those players stay with you. Drew is just that type of player. Julian isn't. He's a really good college basketball player, but when he forces the issue, I think he gets himself in trouble, and it hurts Gonzaga. And he just has to let the game come to him a little bit more, in my opinion. You said it during the Grand Canyon game. He didn't force it. He took shots in rhythm. He took shots that were available to him. And he's become a much more well-rounded player over the last 12 months, where I think last year it was he either scored for you and helped, or there wasn't a whole lot else. This year, we see his ability to rebound. He's a tremendous rebounder from that wing position. We saw that over both games. You said, as you said, 9 against TCU, and Gonzaga wins the battle of the glass, which was critical against TCU, and he had a big role to play in that. I mean, his ability to, particularly on the defensive glass, just to help out Drew and Anton was really evident. You're absolutely right. Defensively, I don't think anybody's looking at Julian saying there's a high level stopper, but with his length and when he's engaged and his efforts there, he's just difficult to score on because he's an athlete. Yeah. But sometimes offensively, I just thought against TCU, particularly early in the game, I mean, he really forced the issue, and they just can't have that going forward. I mean, UCLA will bury you if you take a bad shot. If they play if they win in advance and play UConn or Arkansas, they will bury you if you take bad shots. TCU, as good as they were, they're not good offensively. So they're not able to hurt you quite the same way as some of these other teams might be able to, or you would expect to this weekend. So, I mean, Julian's a heck of a player, and they're not here without him. There's no doubt about that. And he impacted the win. But just from his scoring perspective, I think the numbers in the tournament are a bit indicative of, I don't know if he's putting a pressure on himself, or either there's an external pressure that's someone telling him, or this noise that someone's got to be number 2 after Drew. But I just think if he's a little more patient offensively over this next weekend, his efficiency will skyrocket, and he'll probably end up having the same type of impact in the scoring column.
And my sense is, I think the kid was just riding a wave of confidence from this last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it is. And everything he put up was going in. It was like when he missed one, well, that's not, I'll get it. It'll happen. And but you're right. He did try to make happen. He did the game before. He was the guy who came through and got him back on track, I thought. But let's talk about that TCU game. And I watched Creighton and Baylor right before. I don't want to watch Andrew's brother, Ryan Nemhard, who
he had himself a day. He had himself a day.
Oh, he is quite a player. Him and Andrew, you can just see the IQ out there and the passing and setting up guys and when to shoot, when to dish. That was a high level game. And back of my mind, I was thinking, is this next one going to be, in that ballpark? It was high level, entertaining. TCU right out of the gate kind of did all the things we had talked about, the warning signs. They get multiple guys who can take it to the rack, and they go to the rack. They don't settle out there. I think they have 4 3-pointers in the temps in the first half. They take it to the rim. Big, strong, physical guys, long, athletic. They put pressure on you. They have that play where they have a baseline cutter that got open a couple of times. Just kind of did what they do. They got offensive glass, hit it hard. And I thought this is kind of going the way TCU would draw it up. And about, towards the middle or late part of the half, the Zags figured it out. And one stretch that didn't get a lot of play that I thought was big was when Drew got his second foul, went to the bench. I think they were down 6. And Anton does that spin move, fouled. I think he stole that out of Timmy's playbook. And I think he hit another free throw. They got it back to 2. And Drew got a couple of minutes out and watching. Now the kid hit the 3 at the end for TCU of the half, but to stay right there and even gain when Drew was on the bench, I think that carried into the second half. And when Drew got going, everybody was going again. Rozier, Strother, I think hit a couple threes. Malachi was big in that half. What the difference of that first half to second half, beyond the shooting numbers, we'll get to that too in a second. They flipped that, but it was kind of played the way TCU wanted it for a while, and then pretty much the way the Zags wanted it for the rest of the game.
You stole what my comment was going to be. I thought Anton Watson was the difference throughout the game. I mean, Drew obviously does what he does, and we'll talk about Bolton. He was awesome in the second half, but not only those plays where he scored it a bit, but his ability on the glass. I mean, he had 6 offensive rebounds, I believe, and that was that one where he came in from half court. I forget who missed it in the corner, gets the rebound, kicks it out, hockey assist up top. Gonzaga knocks down the 3. I mean, that's a huge play. I just couldn't I couldn't say enough about Anton. I mean, he missed the dunk and he had a little floater. I think he kind of rushed, but other than that, just a flawless game. Played 37 minutes in both games. I mean, I think that's pretty indicative of the trust factor that the staff has with him, and also the fact of the matter is they need him on the floor for that kind of time. Just what he can do defensively. He had a strip as well, from the weak side, I think, on Miles. Just a tremendous performance from Anton, and just a great weekend. And I thought Bolton, I mean, gosh, you're watching the first half and you're thinking to yourself, I mean, he has been as good a transfer as they've had. And last year, what he did last year, but boy, his shooting this year has been so up and down. You look at what he had done the 3 previous games. He was averaging 4 a game and shooting less than 29% from the field. Just haven't really had one game where he went scoreless. Just not having any impact. And after that first half, I mean, you just kind of you thought to yourself, I mean, it just may be gone. He may just be in his own head. And then to come out and do what, to have 17 at the end of the night. And what I was really impressed with Rozier was, I think sometimes he gets passive offensively, and he just spends a lot of time floating around the perimeter. And he's an unselfish player. He rarely takes a bad shot, but he's not, for as quick as he is and dynamic, he just kind of floats. And in that second half, he pushed the ball in transition in a way that we haven't seen in a long time. And he finished around the rim. He was just so much more assertive. I was really happy for him, but also I think that's a really good omen for Thursday night, where it's not just Strother, Watson, and Timmy. I mean, can Bolton get going? Because he really does shoot it at a high clip, 46% last year. I know his numbers are down this year, but he can really knock down the 3-point shot. And I think the last thing, Greg, 9 minutes, didn't score but 3 blocks. I mean, who had that bet? I don't think anybody made that. I mean, he had a real impact. And then finally Smith. Look, Jim, I for the life of me, I don't understand why he can't break over 20 minutes a game every night. But nonetheless, he doesn't. But he had 17 minutes, 11 points, really efficient, 4 of 6 from the field, 3 of 4 from 3. They don't win the game. His shots were really timely. I mean, that shot he hit in transition, nobody picked him up. That was a big time shot. So, everybody had a moment for the most part, and it was that's a big time win. TCU is really good.
Yeah. Back to Watson for a second. I think we talked about this. I did an article on Timmy and his assist totals just being beyond belief for
Right.
big, going back to the late 70s. It's the highest by a true forward post. You can say the same thing about Anton Watson and his steals. He's second or something in program history, a 6'8", 230-pound forward. He had a few more this weekend. I know he had 3 in the TCU.
He had 5 over the weekend.
Yeah. So his numbers, and I got to go back and look. And Corey Kispert was on that list, but Corey was much more of a wing than Anton was. But the rest, it's all guards. Single season, career, NCAA tournament. I mean, his numbers are going to be just like Drew's on the assist side, which also factor in Anton's on that assist list too for bigs. He's among the highest per game average in decades. So anyway, let's talk about Tim, because he just has that knack of taking over. He's done it so many times. Should go back and count up how many he's just flat taken over, and he did in that second half. And he was pretty good in the first half, but he gets a lot of grief about his defense, probably rightfully so sometimes. But he had a block on Miles, and
it's a timely block.
Oh, and it was one of those where, I don't know, maybe if the guy can't hit a 3, hits a 3, you just kind of look at who you're working with and go, "That's right," because it's their night now. And he blocked that shot on Miles. It looked like he was beat. And when Miles goes to the rim, he has a top gear that is tough to match. And he swatted that. Timmy's the guy who hits the 3, his 3rd of the year. And that was a heat time. I think the shot clock was gone. But if you remember, Timmy's the guy who took the charge against UCLA in the Final Four. And he's had big defensive moments, maybe not as many as people would like, but when he makes a defensive play, it sticks out in your head. And that was another one that helped sway that game. Bolton hits the 2 threes, both on Timmy passes.
Yeah.
He hits the big bucket. I think as the lead was down to 3 inside 2 minutes, he scores inside. They're not taking him out as much at the end of the game because he's hitting his free throws, which is a huge deal in these games that are coming up, because you're just not going to beat people by 15 or 20. They're too good, and you got to finish at that line a lot of times. So just the way he played, the impact he made, hitting the 3, dishing it to guys. He got on the glass a little too. I think he had 8 boards. So and that block and that 3, it was like you just know they're going to find a way to finish this off.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously spoke on a little bit about Drew earlier. I think the defensive narrative is a bit overdone in that, Drew he's not a high block shots, steal rate guy. But what he's become is he's become a really good positional defender. Since that LMU game where they changed their defensive coverage on the pick and roll, where they hedge out and he holds it and allows, they almost double it, and then he vacates. That change and the fact that they worked on that down the stretch in the league, that paid dividends against Miles. Now I know Miles Miles had 24 and he was 8 of 13 from the field, but I mean, just 13 shots attempted. I mean, that kid was trying to get over 20, but they really made him, they forced him to give up the ball. So even though Miles was really effective and dynamic, I mean, there were, at least 10 possessions where he gave it up, where he might not have otherwise had to against. I mean, Drew was really good. He got there early. He held it. And, even at home, you could hear the communication. The mics would pick up. Drew hollering out what side the screen's on, holding it. And then the backside defense was really good, other than maybe one possession that in my mind that I can recall. K-State really wasn't able to hurt Gonzaga out of those doubles. Gonzaga was able to really cover the backside. So, yeah, I think the whole narrative with Drew about his defense is overdone. Yes, he's not a high-level defender, but who cares? At this level, I think he does a more than an adequate job. You see what he does around there. He doesn't block a lot of shots, but he contests a lot. He forces players to shoot over him. And unlike a lot of scorers that are this talented, he's engaged on that end. He gives effort. I mean, how many times have we seen, not just in Gonzaga's program history, but also just around the college basketball and even the professional level, where you've got these really gifted scorers that don't have a lot of motivation or interest to compete on the other end. So I don't think Drew's ever had an issue competing defensively, and there's just something about his game and his career. There's a timeliness to it, to how he when he steps up, and he was just. I mean, he was Gonzaga. I don't know if Gonzaga's in the tournament without him, let alone winning these games. I think he's the difference. And I heard Mark after the game saying he thinks he's the best player in college basketball. And I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know if you're serious about having that conversation, Drew Timme's in the conversation.
Oh yeah, no question. I mean, there's only a couple of guys you can even put in the same category at this point. The kid at Purdue had a tremendous year, Zach Edey. Wilson is very good at Kansas. The names, Trace, the kid at Indiana, the center, and
Jackson.
Yeah, I mean, those are all fabulous players. But what Drew does at the college level, I mean, he's marching up those NCAA tournament scoring lists like crazy. I mean, he's in with the big boys, the all-timer type of names. So. And that brings us to this week. On to Vegas. The Zags will play UCLA, which is an all-time program. Legendary with the titles they won back in the 70s, and then won in 95. I think I covered it.
Yeah.
In Seattle, they pulled off a title there. Three Final Fours I know under Ben Howland, and then got back in with Mick Cronin here a couple years ago. The Zags ran into him, and we talk about great games to watch. That was 93-90, if I remember. Overtime, Suggs banked from 40 feet to win it. Both offenses were literally just doing what they wanted to do. The shooting percentages were through the roof. And if you love offensive basketball, that was one heck of a game. Mm-hmm. What do you Morrison's call of the shot by Suggs? All those things still in my head. What pops into your head when you think about that battle a couple years ago?
It's an all-time game. Another chapter in Gonzaga lore. It feels like all the great programs have those kind of moments. And I remember we were watching that game at our house, and that was, I think they'd started opening things up a bit with COVID, so we had some friends over. I'll never forget. I was sitting next to Zach Gord, who obviously played at GU, and he and I are watching it. And then my wife's sitting to my left, and another buddy's sitting to my right. Suggs hits the shot. Zach and I look at each other, kind of, hitting each other. I look up, my wife's leaping into the arms of my buddy with her arm up in the air, just like complete bedlam, and our kids are sound asleep. It was just a great moment, man. I mean, the thing about those moments too is you don't have to be a Zag fan or even a UCLA fan to recognize that what you just saw is iconic, right? I mean, in 20 years, we're going to be watching the intro for the tournament, and Jalen Suggs' shot will be part of that intro.
Yeah. I mean, you got, just because it's fresh in my mind, Grand Canyon's coach, Bryce Drew.
Yeah.
I remember play like it was yesterday. I don't even know what round it was. I don't know who they were playing. And he
Mississippi State, maybe Ole Miss. I can't remember, but
yeah, the
Leitner's shot.
Yeah, I mean, Leitner's shot. Michael Jordan, the swishing he was a freshman, I believe, swishing the shot to win the tournament. Keith Smart. I mean, you think of those plays; those are the ones that are memorable. The Zags have got a few of those. I think that maybe not on the NCAA tournament level nationally, but Matthews' shot, Casey's tip in.
Well, Dimitri Goodson, a game winner against Western Kentucky, I called that on the radio in Portland.
Yeah, so yeah, that was a remarkable game, and the best part is a lot of those guys are back with UCLA. Probably a little irritated how that game turned out in Indianapolis, and the Zags are back with several of those guys that went through that battle. You've got Tiger Campbell. You've got, I think Singleton was part of that game. You got
Hawkes,
who's a tremendous player. The Zags, you've got Drew Timme, Anton Watson. We're certainly involved in that. I don't think Julian, he might have played, but been very sparingly. He was on the back burner at that point. The last 2 years, that's changed. But you've got Cronin and Few, and they've gone at it before too. So of all the battles, positional battles, the point guard, the Tiger, probably the wings with Hawkes. I expect Anton to be on Hawkes. And then who's going to guard Timme? I know they've got a center that's hurt, that's playing. He had a shoulder injury. Adam Bona, I believe his name is. And there are some fabulous matchups to watch. What are you looking forward to watching on Thursday when those two get together again?
Well, I'd be interested to see if Singleton plays. He obviously left their last game hurt. UCLA's really struggled with injuries. Clark, Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year, he's out. That's a big loss for them. If Singleton can't play, was it Boma? Bona.
I think it's
his first game was this last game, right? He'd been out for a while with the shoulder injury. I think he sustained at Arizona, or the season finale against Arizona. So at the end of the day, I think it comes down to Hawkes, Campbell, and Bailey. If Singleton can play, he's important for them because he's really their best perimeter shooter, shoots at over 40%, and he's a 5-year guy, so he's got a ton of experience. But that Gonzaga UCLA game was a bit of an anomaly for the type of program Cronin wants, which is defensive first, right? And this is a very good defensive team. This is not an elite team defensively in UCLA. They do rank third in the country in their scoring defensive. As far as keeping teams down from scoring, they're top 20 in defensive field goal percentage, top 40 and 3-point percentage. And they do a really good job turning people over, top 25, almost 16 turnovers a game. So they'll get after you, but they don't have a lot of size. Bona he's a freshman, really talented physically. But we've seen Drew go to work on these really long, athletic young kids. I mean, I think about Mobley at USC. I was at Duran last year with Memphis. That's just a tough ask for anybody, let alone a freshman. So I think that's the challenge for UCLA is inside. How can they slow Drew down? I mean, they're gonna throw the kitchen sink at him. And the thing about Hawkes and Campbell is just they are winners, and they compete. They're not afraid of anybody. That is going to be, if not the toughest team Gonzaga's played mentally, certainly at the top of the list this year. Hawkes was great against Northwestern, 24 points, efficient, rebounds. He does a little bit of everything. He's really good around the rim, shoots at over 50%. not a great 3-point shooter, but one of those guys who just kind of hits timely threes. So you don't necessarily want to leave him open. So even though he has a low 3-point percentage on average and on throughout the course of his career, because he just finds a way to knock down those shots in a timely way, you just don't want to leave him open. And then Campbell, I mean, he has really struggled to score the past 3 games, only 2 of 9 from 3, 23% from the field. But he's one of those guys who, if his shot's not falling, he finds a way to help you. You know, over the weekend, he had 17 assists and 2 turnovers. You know, better than a 3-to-1 assist-to-turnover ratio on the year, and just a gritty point guard despite being undersized. And he does. They always get into what they want to get into with him. And I think for UCLA, and quite frankly for the game, the tipping point might be Bailey, their freshman, who all year was, came off the bench. Clark was starting. You know, he had a good freshman year, but there wasn't a lot asked of him. Since Clark's been out of the lineup, he's averaging 17 a game. And he's really efficient, 57% from the field, 39% from the 3-point line. He's a very talented freshman, about 6'5", good athlete. And he's not been afraid of the moment. So I think it's always fun to play UCLA. I mean, these are 2 of the 3 premier programs on the West Coast. I throw Arizona into that mix. It's going to be interesting to see who can control the tempo. Gonzaga's going to play faster than UCLA. Can UCLA keep the game in the 60s? Or is Gonzaga going to find a way to speed it up, or at least for stretches, and get the game in the upper 70s? But either way, Jim, my view is I like Gonzaga's match. I think it's a good matchup for GU. There's nothing that UCLA does that bothers me, or would worry me, I should say. So my expectation is Gonzaga gets that one, but I would expect it to be another classic.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think of a matchup wise, I don't think it's too bad for Gonzaga. Strother, Bailey should be really good battle. Yeah. 2 guys who put it in the hole and scored ways. But that's going to be interesting. It's going to be a rock fight if Mick Cronin has his way. That's scorely in the 50s or 60s, and if Mark has his way, Mark Few, it'll be in the 80s or upper 70s. But should be a great game. And they're the 2 seed. The Zags are the 3 seed. The other side of the bracket is Arkansas. I think it was an 8, and UConn, which is a 4. But a lot of folks have UConn going to the Final Four, and some have picked them in their brackets. Some of the national analysts have done that. And Arkansas, very, very impressive what they did with Kansas. Down for a lot of the game and found a way to, very similar to last year, a lot of length, a lot of athleticism, a certain lottery pick or 2, probably. And when they're on, they are tough to deal with. And UConn has the big center. They've got a really talented, and I guess he's a bigger guard that can score it. That's going to be an interesting game as well, because Arkansas if they can put the tempo and the style of play the way they like it. It's tough to beat them because they just have great athleticism and length all across the board.
Yeah, I mean, Arkansas first. I mean, they're a really young team when you think about Black, Smith, and Walsh. It was interesting against Kansas. I mean, they effectively benched Smith down the stretch. They had one of their guards get going, and I'm forgetting it might have been Black, but Davis got going. But it was interesting. They went with the guys that had confidence in, and Smith's been in and out all year, been hurt. But I mean, all 3 of those guys, particularly Black and Smith, I mean, those are lottery pick talents. Arkansas is really long. They're physical inside with Johnson and Mitchell. They did a great job on the glass against Kansas. They don't generally shoot it at a good clip. 3 of 15 from 3 against Kansas. Look at their numbers on the year. I mean, their numbers say that they're an average team, but then you watch them and you realize that they are littered with NBA athletes. Their athleticism is what makes them so difficult. But from a matchup perspective, while that athleticism always concerns you, I wouldn't be as worried about them because I think you could guard Arkansas. I think you could craft something defensively where you kind of drove them into their weaknesses versus UConn, who I think is really good. I was really impressed with what they did against St. Mary's. Now, obviously, St. Mary's, Dukas goes out, and he had kind of found a rhythm, and that really hurt St. Mary's. I don't think they win the game, but I certainly don't think it's the blowout that it ended up being. But you look at UConn; they're really solid defensively. They're not immensely deep. They really rely on their starting five, but they got great minutes out of Klimgan, their 7-footer. 12 minutes, but 5 rebounds, had 3 blocks. He's a really nice backup for, is it Sangu? Sanogo, thank you. And that's the one thing about UConn that I think would make you nervous is they've got a true big who's big, strong, and he can put a ton of pressure on you defensively. I mean, he could score. And they're going to run a lot of offense through him. And that's the one thing Gonzaga just doesn't have is we don't have great size around the rim. I don't think that's as impactful when you don't have to guard around the rim. In other words, you're not having to guard one-on-one against a guy who can really hurt you. If they play UConn, if they advance to play UConn, they're going to have to figure out a way to slow him down, and that's probably by doubling him, which obviously automatically puts your defense at a disadvantage. And finally, they've got a lot of guys who can just score. They're really skilled on the perimeter. They're athletic. They play really hard for Hurley. That would be a lot of fun to watch. But I would worry about that just the stylistic matchup for Gonzaga against UConn in a way that I wouldn't with Arkansas.
Yeah, I think the same thing. Either one of those teams, Arkansas, just how they get after the glass, how they pressure you defensively, it's kind of an uncomfortable type of game. Yeah. And UConn is just very good, very solid. They're good both ends of the floor. They got a shot blocker, they got a 3-ball shooter. I mean, they've got a very nice team too. So if the Zags get that far, those are bound to be classics as well. Quick thought on the tournament itself overall. We always have that great opening weekend where the March Madness takes full effect. You've got Princeton, I believe, beat Arizona. I didn't see much of that, but was blown away when I heard the score. Florida Atlantic has been kind of an incredible story thus far. And then you've got more the lower seeds. I think I predicted a 8-9 beating at least one seed, and I got that.
Yeah,
right.
I remember that. I remember that.
Right. Yeah, but Tommy Lloyd's team losing to Princeton, boy, it had to be tough to digest, and that was a team I thought was fully capable of beating Alabama.
Yeah, buddy, I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Well, I just said that Arizona, I think a lot of people had them going a long way, and I predicted them to beat Alabama and make the Final Four. I don't know if you caught that game, but man, that's a tough way to go.
Yeah, I did. I mean, to be perfectly blunt, Arizona's guards look petrified. First off, Princeton's really good. I mean, they're bigger than you think. I can't pronounce their kid's name. I think he's number 20, British kid. I mean, he is a stud. You could put him, and I'm not just saying this, you put him in any program in the country, he's probably starting. So they've got, I don't know about his pro prospects, but from a college perspective, he is a really dynamic all-around player. They run everything through him, and then they're just skilled. And Arizona, they just couldn't. They were up 10, and they just couldn't put him away. And as they got tighter and tighter and tighter, Creesa, Henderson, Rainey, they all just puckered up, and they didn't want the ball. I mean, there were a couple of possessions down the stretch where they're open and didn't want to shoot it. So credit Princeton, but I certainly think Arizona's going to look back on that and say we just coughed it up. But from just my general thoughts, I forget how many teams the Big Ten had, but only one's left in Michigan State. The Big Ten has just not been good in this tournament in a long time. I was really impressed with Tennessee against Duke. It I watched almost the entirety of that game, and I wasn't sure if it was basketball for large stretches. I mean, that was as physical a game as I've seen in a long time. And I thought Duke did an admirable job trying to compete in that type of game. But the officials let so much go that, I mean, Tennessee just beat them up and won the game. And I would not want to play Tennessee. They are so big. They're really physical, and they've got just enough skill on the perimeter to make shots. I think this thing has really opened up nicely for them, and they may get to I believe they're on the same side as Alabama, so they're going to be familiar with them. But all in all, it's a great tournament. That Purdue game was just crazy, and that's why we love this thing.
Well, and I think I confess this to you that I can't get certain things out of my head, especially when I've watched them in person. And what Tennessee did to the Zags in that exhibition game, scored 90. And I know they're missing their point guard, but I did put them in my Final Four. I couldn't get that out of my head. Texas could have beat the Zags by 25 that night or 30, almost negative score. They were that good and are very experienced and balanced. I've got them in the Final Four.
Right.
Alabama, I don't have in the Final Four because of how they had trouble guarding. So,
well, and you had questions about Purdue.
Yeah, same. Yeah. Even though they did beat the Zags pretty good, I just thought there was some holes there that they could opponents could take advantage of, and that's what happened. Well, we did this last week at this time, and we'll do it the same this week. We'll wrap it up by asking you, will the Zags be playing next week, or will we be doing a season wrap-up?
My instinct says that we'll be playing next week. I just, I'll be honest. I think that they handle UCLA. I think Gonzaga is a bad matchup for them, and I think it's probably a coin flip against either Arkansas or UConn. I prefer to play even though I think UConn is a harder matchup for GU in some respects. I'd rather play them because they're just not quite as long and athletic, and they're not quite as deep. But there just seems something different about this group all of a sudden. So I'm going to say they're playing. How about you?
Well, I've been going back and forth that the way they're playing, the way they handle adversity now, the way they've dug out a lot of these close wins, second half comebacks, I think they got a lot of belief going. And I think I'd better look into Houston flights, start figuring that out. Well, thanks for listening in this week. You can find the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google, wherever you find your favorite podcast, we're probably there. And then also at the Spokesman-Review website, that's spokesman.com. Click on the Zags page, and you can find all our coverage in print and the podcast right there. Well, thanks for tuning in, everybody, and catch us next Monday on the Zags Basketball Insiders Podcast.